Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll look back on the close game that Freo managed to get over the line against the Carlton Blues after a Cameron Wood missed kick in the end in the last minute of the game. We'll have a quick look at Peel's comfortable victory over Perth last week with a couple of players pushing for selection. And then obviously the big grudge match this week against probably arguably our biggest rivals, certainly outside of West Coast, in Geelong down at Skilled Stadium. And obviously it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Joining us this week we have a four-man pod happening, and we've got our usual resident Victorian expert, Seppo. How are you, mate?
I'm good, Centurions. I am looking forward to this week of football. It's going to be a ripper.
Absolutely, and we're adding a bit of international flavour this week, and thanks again for joining us, is Gil. How are you, mate?
Doing great, bright and early at 4:30 in the morning. Can't wait for Saturday night at 2:40 in the morning.
Definite diehard, mate. And also joining us, as usual, is Valkorum. How are you, mate? Thanks for coming on board.
Not a problem. Glad to be here.
All right. Obviously, last week, Fremantle, most sides thought after the probably debacle of the victory or the loss against St Kilda that Fremantle would come out firing. But Mick Malthouse came true to his words and said that they would certainly try and spoil the party, and bar a really sort of strong effort and probably Herculean effort by Fife in the last quarter, along with probably Ballantyne kicking a couple. Fremantle just managed to sneak home in the end. 12 goals, 11.83 to 11 goals, 12.78, with Lachie Neale kicking the winning goal. Obviously, Seppo, what did you think of the match overall?
It was a very nervous game. It was one of the nervous games I've sort of felt at the edge of the couch watching it at home. It was a very nerve-wracking performance, and I'm just glad we got the result in the end, because I thought the way that Carlton sort of kicked off in the third, I was getting pretty nervous, thinking we haven't capitalised on a couple of chances, and we really let Carlton get into it. But I'm just so glad we've got players like Fife that carry the team when needed, but it's not good to do that every single week. So I'm just glad that we got the result, and I haven't even gone back and look over any footage from this game. It's not one I want to sit down and watch again, so I'm just glad we got the result. We can move on. But how good was that finish from Lachie Neale to slot that last one? It's almost like we had two or three chances to do it at the end, but just great that a young kid gets his chance to step up, and only with a couple of seconds to go in the game to kick that. It's beautiful.
Yes, okay, yeah, absolutely. And especially after Ibbotson missed that goal from about 35 out, and we thought it might have been the last chance, but obviously, as you said, they managed to get the ball down there and get the chocolates. What did you think of the game, Gil?
I was really amazed that we actually won that one, because if you look at Carlton's inaccuracy, especially in the first half, it's a game we really might have, and Carlton could say should have lost that game. And if you look at it in the last couple of minutes, Carlton had really been bringing their A game all night, and it was a rapid succession of mistakes that I think handed us a golden opportunity. Because when you look at it, Sam Docherty kicked right out on the full, and then you had Levi Casbolt spilling a sitter, and then, of course, Cameron Wood kicking it right into the waiting arms of Lachie Neale. And like Seppo, it was one of those things where I was nervous the whole game. And finally, when Lachie came up with that big intercept mark, then I think we could finally rest easy. But then we really couldn't, because then in the last 9 seconds of the game, they still had an opportunity. But it was a good one, I think, to finally find a way to win.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, it was fine. That was the important thing. Sometimes those, sides like ours, or good sides don't play that well and still manage to get the win, and that was the important thing, especially with the result with against Collingwood and Port the week after. What about yourself, Valkorum? What did you think of the performance?
Well, to state the obvious, Carlton stole defeat from the jaws of victory. I think the two things for me that I don't think were given enough credit afterwards. I mean, Fife was fantastic in the fourth quarter. Let's not deny that whatsoever. But I think, apart from the fact that he was at the right spot and Cameron Wood picked him out and kicked it to him, Lachie Neale, I thought, actually stepped up in the fourth quarter. I thought he'd been quiet for 3 quarters, and then that fourth quarter he stepped up with, I think, got most of his possessions in that fourth quarter. Obviously got that goal. I thought he played really well in that fourth quarter as well. The other thing that I don't think people talk too much about, they sort of just glossed over, is that we were 2 rotations down for pretty much half the game. I mean, Pav down early, and then Mzungu off before half time, and was on the push bike for the second half, except for that minute when he went to the pocket to help a rotation, and then had to actually chase the ball and didn't look comfortable at all. But I mean, I don't think that's actually been brought up. I mean, they say in these days, you're one rotation down, it's a massive disadvantage, and we were 2 down and still managed to come away with to snatch the victory. I don't think that was brought up enough.
It was actually the lowest amount of rotations we've had all year, and the 15th lowest of any club. So obviously, Gold Coast held that record against Collingwood when they only used 78.
Yeah,
when they
2 weeks prior or something.
Yeah, depleted bench, but that was a pretty hard effort. Like I said, without Mzungu's rung, and it's something we're going to miss this week. But for Pav to go down, and with that as well, the way that Ballantyne stood up, and it's amazing how much for a small forward he actually stands up in the contest and not only gets a crumb, but he actually provides a bit of a target.
But you look at him in
couple of marks.
And you look at him in that fourth quarter, he was actually playing a lead up forward instead of being that guy who, occasionally leads up, but, he's always at the foot of Pav or the foot of Clark and Sandilands, and not Fife, because Fife never drops anything above his head, but, being that guy in the front there. But he actually turned and had to be that lead up forward and played a slightly different role in that second half, and then kicked his couple of goals in the end as well.
It's probably the gazillionth time he's been our leading goal scorer for that game. He's kicked another 3 goals, and I think he features in the top 10 of the Coleman now even. So Hayden Ballantyne certainly put on a show this year.
Yeah, and he had a quiet game from his standards. I mean, he only had 8 touches, I think it was.
That's a lot of mileage when he has 8 touches and goals 3 times. And if you look at the stats, that's now 28-1 Fremantle's record when Ballantyne kicks 3 or more in a game.
Oh, that's a brilliant stat.
I think the bigger probably the other concern I think that Fremantle will take from it is that Carlton, even though they only had 40 inside 50s, and I know Ross Lyon talked about it, but just in the last couple of weeks, you've seen teams being able to work Fremantle out a little bit in terms of just keeping the ball, even though they're going to take their time. They're not going to rush it down the ground. And, particularly if you're watching it at the ground, you would have noticed, and I don't know how evident it was on TV for you guys, but just they were able to switch the ball, and provided their skills were up to scratch, which they did for particularly in that second and third quarter, they were able to get quite easy entries around and eventually get into the inside 50s. The other part that was probably a concern as well was obviously getting the 6 goals from the centre clearances, where Fremantle, it looked like in the end that Cameron Wood was sort of using rather than sort of contesting the ruck all the time, he was using his body to add an extra midfielder. But you could see our wingers coming in, and if Carlton got the ball out, they were actually able to go out wide and just be able to get good ball use inside 50, and obviously caused a number of goals for them. So I think there are 2 areas that obviously I think Ross Lyon would be concentrating on during the review this week. I mean, how did it look to you guys on the TV with that? Because St Kilda did it quite well the week before, obviously, as well.
The commentators did make notice of it. I think during the game, I think Carlton were leaving the 7 clearances quite a bit, and they ended up finishing 13-10 in their favour. So I think we fixed a couple of things up, but for a while it was obvious. And I think Judd and Murphy are at the forefront of most of them, but you could definitely see that there's something wrong with our midfield work, and it's not up to scratch as it was last year, even at the start of this year when we were dominating.
I don't think you have to be a genius to work out that we're not going well at the moment, but what do they say about good teams? You always find a way to win, and as Ross says, you bank the 4 points and move on. The other one for me was watching McFarlane play. When the big forwards of Waite and Casbolt and those guys were leading further up the ground, so more up to that centre wing area, do you notice that McFarlane was a good 3-4 metres behind him and letting him mark it? Where he's normally right up him and trying to actually make it hard for him? Is it just him trying to look after himself to make sure he gets through?
I thought that maybe that might be the case, but the other thing you've got to remember as well is if you look at the number of goals that those key forwards kicked in the game, I mean, Waite kicked 3, and obviously, but a couple of them were pretty. One was, I think, courtesy of that charity 50 by Fisher. But Casbolt only kicked 1, and I think the other key forward for them didn't. Who was that? Henderson. He didn't kick any. So if you look at that side of it, I think they were pretty happy to let. If you look at where McFarlane let him do it, most of those were up near the wing, and I think it's hard to tell. I mean, this week will probably give us a better indication, I think. It
just seemed like he was just backing off, letting him take that mark up there, rather than keeping the pressure on and allowing our zone, our pressure, our manic defense to actually take possession of the ball, and I think that sort of doesn't help us.
Yeah, I think the probably other major concern probably for Fremantle is, probably the fact that that probably and it's been probably noticeable for a few weeks, but it just seemed even evident last week was the fact that Mundy hasn't been anywhere near his usual performance, and probably for the last 5 or 6 weeks he just hasn't looked. I don't know whether he's not fit or whether not sure what it is, but I mean you guys have obviously seen him quite a bit of him as well, but he just doesn't seem to be. And you always look slow when you're chasing when we haven't got the ball.
It's funny we say that too, because Mundy was our third or fourth highest possession winner as well, and is it just because we expect so much of Mundy now, or?
Well, I think it might be maybe just the polish. Maybe just his polish isn't there, and his decision making hasn't been quite as good as you said. We've got to set. You do set high standards for him, but I will say that when the game was on in that last quarter, he did come out and show probably in that first 5 minutes set a bit of a tone.
And then Fife took over.
And then Fife sort of took over after that. But Seppo and Gil, what do you think of it?
Well, not so much Mundy, but one thing that always concerns me is whenever I see an opposition team kicking and taking a lot of uncontested marks, that always worries me, because going back to the semifinal a couple of years ago against Adelaide, it seems like a formula in teams' recipes to beat us is not to kick to a contest. And I think in some ways having that manic defense, that sometimes the team almost looks a little bit bored, almost a little lethargic when they're not actually contesting the ball, and teams can use that to move the ball farther down the ground on us. And I've noticed that Adelaide did that a couple of years ago. And if you look at the uncontested mark count, I always worry when we're losing that in the statistics, because it's something that I've seen Hawthorn do also, and especially St. Kilda do in that disaster a couple of weeks ago. And I think Carlton tried it a little bit too. I think one indicator when we're going really well is when teams are constantly moving the ball backwards via the handball and not by kick. So I think those are some indicators that I see, at least on TV, that give me pause.
I think Carlton did it a lot with the kicks. They had a truckload more kicks than they did handballs, and it was that switching kick and trying to really open and spread it up, and their skills sort of made them be able to do that. And poorer teams will go for that handball and will apply the pressure, and you'll see players like Ballantyne and De Boer and Neil all sort of push up and apply the pressure, but it hasn't been evident recently. And I don't know if it's their fitness levels or the players have been instructed to do that, but it certainly does seem like a little weakness to our game plan. But hopefully we can do it when it matters, and hopefully this week is one of those weeks.
Yeah. And then another thing to consider, too, when you're thinking about that manic pressure, what do we do against teams that aren't rattled by it? Because you look at Hawthorn, and Hawthorn, I would say, show more composure with the ball than any team I've seen in recent memory. That they're just not going to be pressured into mistakes, and I think we've seen that in the last 4 games that we've played against them. And you wonder what the game plan has to take on when you run into a side as talented and as skilled as Hawthorn, because it really comes down sometimes to basic skills.
Yeah, and I think let's be honest. I think most of Fremantle supporters pretty much knew that 10-week block we just went through when we played those bottom 10 sides was always going to be a bit of a precursor to this last month. Obviously last year we had all the talk about Fremantle having the soft draw into the finals, and this time we certainly don't have that. And I think even Worsfold tonight on Channel 7 News was talking about the fact that probably Fremantle have probably had a bit of an eye on this game for a few weeks, and whether they have taken their eye off the prize or not, or of each week, we'll see. But I think most of us all year have been sort of, apart from that one game, the first round against Collingwood, where we sort of all looked $1 million, we've just been waiting for the side to click. And I think this week will be a pretty good indicator for us about where we really sit in the grand scheme of things against Geelong down there at Skilled Stadium, who are also fighting for a top 4 or top 2 spot. Anything else you want to bring up, boys, before we move on?
No, I think we're pretty good.
Okay. All right. Obviously, during the week, on the weekend as well in the Waffle, Peel Thunder had their probably biggest win for the season, 21 goals 14, 140 to 12 goals 375. And a number of players for Fremantle had standout games. Morabito having 31 touches with 7 inside 50s. And Hayden Crozier also having 30 touches with 2 goals. Sylvia had also a number of 23 touches and 7 inside 50s, but apparently has done a hamstring. And Ballard continued to rack up the possessions as well with 28. But in the end, a pretty comfortable win for Fremantle against for Peel against a disappointing Perth side. But it was good to see a number of our players, and the other one as well, obviously Michael Wood kicking 5 goals. Probably a little bit of luck for Fremantle towards the end there with Silvani having a bit of a brain fade and getting a reprimand due to a bit of a reckless attack on the ball, and probably was, but mind you, after the match review panel lotto that goes on in the AFL, nothing surprises you anymore.
I suppose the other thing you mentioned is the 3 goals that Max Duffy's kicked, and that's been a continued sort of run of good games that he's had that's earned him the recall this week, because he's now strung a couple of games after returning from injury in the waffle, and it's great to see that type of a player, that's something we need. He's gotten scoreboard a couple of times and he's kicked 3-3. I don't know, just reading off the stats, I don't know where they were actually kicked, but sounds like something we need at the moment. Without Walters out there, Duffy's one that looks like he's got that X factor. Everyone keeps talking him up of that ability. It's great to see that he's actually put some runs on the board in the waffle.
And it's obviously a show of some form, because he's only played 4 games or something now, and he's sort of gotten better each week, and then now he's got his recall. So
yeah,
I think a bit different for Ross than St Kilda. He's given the guys a go that are showing. Maybe he just didn't have that at St Kilda, and he got that reputation of not playing anyone else.
The other thing about Duffy, too, if you look at the stats, not only the 3 goals, but he had a total of 6 shots on goal, too. So he actually kicked 3-3 for that game, and also took 9 marks. And it's one of the things where Coach Lyon isn't easily impressed by anything. So for him to say that Max Duffy in his press conference is an excitement machine, boy, that was encouraging to hear something like that from him.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about Duffy, he's definitely an interesting sort of player, and some of the things that obviously when he played at East Fremantle too, he can certainly do some things that sort of make you shake your head and sort of go, in good and bad, because he can kick some miraculous goals and he can just do some stuff that you wouldn't expect, but then he can just do some absolute brain fade. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes, but I think his last 2 or 3 weeks at Peel have certainly been a much better performance for him. So, I mean, it's good to see reward, and I think obviously he's going to be really playing for his career here as well. I think if he, he's really probably coming out of contract, and he'll be one of those sort of 3 players who will be on the chopping block, so to speak. So it'll certainly be a big game for him this week, and as I said, it'll certainly test out the Geelong defender who's on him, because he doesn't play a conventional style of football, and he can. He said he's sort of got a little bit of, not Stevie J, not in that way, but he just does things that you don't always expect, and it'll be interesting to see how he goes under the bright lights at down at Skilled Stadium. He's certainly very quick, though.
Pointing out from this waffle game is Alex Pearce. He got named in the best, and it's great to see someone that only got 11 touches with 5 marks, probably playing down back. It's great to see that we've got some future in these young guys, and they're getting recognised for it. And I think even Ross has talked about talking up Pearce a bit, quite as another beast, along with Atnas. So it's great to see that he's developing well and had no further setbacks.
Yeah, well, he's a bit of a beast, isn't he? He's like 200 centimetres and 90 kilos or something, Pearce.
Yeah, it's interesting to see as well. Obviously, moving on from that, obviously this week there's two omissions, and with Gary Gibberton out with a back and Tendai Mzungu with a hamstring, and Mzungu's loss I think will be pretty sorely felt. He does a lot of unheralded work in that midfield, and it'll be interesting to see how Fremantle cover his loss, because he's a very hard runner and big body, and certainly does a job each week. And a couple of goals last week, particularly early on in the game where we were struggling a little bit, I thought a couple of his efforts were sensational, particularly right in front of the bench there, where I sit, and it was played very well. But also coming into the side, and it was good to see probably a reward for hard work for Hayden Crozier, who's probably been racking up a lot of touches at Peel, and been certainly sort of showing a little bit probably that we expected early on. Anyone who watched the pre-season stuff with Hayden thought he was going to take a step forward this year, but just hasn't managed to cement his spot when he gets to go at the next level. So hopefully he can do that this week. And obviously Duffy making his debut. While for Geelong, Hamish McIntosh comes back in for Dawson Simpson. So that'll be quite a good inclusion for the Cats as well. What do you guys think
Were you
of the
guys
ins and outs?
surprised to see that Sam Menegola wasn't a wild card and didn't get some consideration considering his tank? Concerning Tendai being out and needing someone with that running ability and the endurance. What did you guys think of that?
His disposal, to be honest, hasn't been setting the world on fire. No one denies that the guy can run and has an AFL elite level tank, but there's always been criticism that his disposal isn't great.
I actually like the way, not necessarily that Sam Menegola wasn't included, but by the fact that we're actually addressing a need with getting Crozier and Duffy in. It's two types of players they actually need to add to this side, even though we are losing Ibbotson and Mzungu, but what we're adding to the side and shuffling around some other players that are going to play a role, it's just great to see that the players we come in are exactly what we need, and it's unfortunate we're losing Ibbotson and Mzungu, and I wouldn't be, if we were saying that Ibbotson was going to be replaced with Ballard because he's played that type of a role down, half back or a bigger body, and Mzungu being replaced by Menegola, I don't think that's really fixing our side to be the best to beat Geelong. So I'm actually glad the way that they've actually made the changes this week.
I would agree with that too, especially needing speed to counter Geelong's speed, and then also just frankly needing to score more. That was another worry in terms of Carlton. We had that great first quarter and put a lot of points on the board, but it just seemed to just really hit a wall. But all along, when Coach Lyon has talked about wanting to add 2 more goals per game, that just hasn't really happened. And it's kind of nice to add some firepower to the side. I like that roll of the dice.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is obviously we've got listed in the emergencies is Michael Walters, which is fantastic to see. But obviously you just never know how he's going to come back and how long it's going to take him to get form. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Gil, with the fact Fremantle will have to find other avenues to goal, whether it's... And these 2 guys are probably our best option in that forward half. And whether, as you said, you move the ball up a little bit or whatnot, but we do need... And both these guys do have that X factor about them to a degree. And I think that's good. We just need to find a different avenue. It'll be interesting to see. Obviously, I'm pretty sure Silvani may have gone over with...
Yeah, Silvani and Tabner are on the plane.
Yeah.
And Walters is obviously playing for Peel. I don't mind that because Tabner, if Pav gets affected after the flight and they find that he's not going to be able to refine, then Tabner comes in, and I think sort of you got Silvani there as coverage for probably McFarlane, just to make sure he's going to be fine as well. I don't mind that. It's pretty good. Yeah.
The other thing as well is that the other part might be that the fact is that Silvani, they may even play him as a forward. I know he's not a great kick and he hasn't set the ball on fire, but he does provide a really strong contest. And
very strong.
And he is able to bring the ball to ground. And I know even at training a few times that Lions always tried to calm Silvani down because he's likely to injure someone while he's there.
I think it's all the heavy metal he listens to.
Hey, nothing wrong with heavy metal.
Oh, nothing wrong. Oh, no, that's all. It's all good to get pumped up before the game, but got to know when to dial it down a little bit.
Just hang on a sec, mate.
The other one for me that's got me interested is Garrick Ibbotson. There's been no talk about it all week, and then right at the selection time, we find out he's got a back issue.
Apparently, him and both Sylvia did their injuries at the Tuesday training session, so it looks like they were found out.
Ross talked about that on Tuesday night. Is it Channel 7 night for Tuesday night for him? I think it is. He talked about that Sylvia had done the injury, but there was no mention of Ibbotson.
Yeah, maybe it didn't flare up.
It's probably a minor back issue.
Just concerning because he's had that, obviously the shoulder this year, but...
I'm glad it's back and not shoulder. I'd be more worried if it said shoulder, but the fact that it's back might just be a little knock and they've decided to rest him. So, it's going to put more extra effort onto Johnson and Duffield and the other guys back down there. But it is a bit, even though we've got Spur, Dawson, Duffield, McFarlane, Johnson, the regular players down there.
Yeah, that's only still, 5.
Yeah, it still makes me a bit nervous. 6. Sutcliffe, you could say, is almost a part of this back 6 that's been going. So,
yeah, but he's been pushing a bit further up on the wing of late too.
Do you think they might move Main back there?
It's possible. He's gone back before in the last few weeks, hasn't he?
Yeah. And with the inclusion of Crozier and Duffy, we've probably got the chance to take away Main from that forward line.
Yeah, it's probably a good call.
The other
I'm glad that I'm glad you brought up Chris Main because I would love to see him get more involved and take on more of a role as he had in the last couple of years. Because we talk about needing more avenues to goal and more scoring. I mean, Main has gone from being a dead-eye dick right in front of goals when he has set shots to really having much more of a defensive role. And I wonder how much we've sacrificed by not having Main be part of that action anymore.
The only thing that concerns me about Main down back is he's great without the ball and his chase and effort, but I think his decision making is a split second slower than some of those other players that play off that half back line and when they've got players in their face to make that smart executed decision out of the back line. I don't think Main is as good as the other players like Sutcliffe and Duffield and the other guys that play down there.
Probably right. But, I mean, is he going to be able to take that third tour that allows Johnson to roll off a bit more and get the ball more in Johnson's hand, which is not a bad thing?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be an interesting thing because with the game this week, obviously they'll go in with Kirsten and Hawkins, with obviously the two talls, but they're obviously going to have a lot of speed around that. But I mean, if you look at the small forwards they've got listed there, it's Motlop, Christensen, Stokes, Johnson, and Bartel. That's going to those particular guys normally do cause a bit of problems for us, and I think it's really going to be important if they're only going to go with those two talls that Johnson does get back to probably his best form because he has been probably struggling since he's come back from his injury and having an impact as that third man and bringing the ball out. So it'll be critical for us to be able to do that, get those intercepts inside 50 this week if we want to stop, particularly letting the ball get to ground because if Stokes and Christensen and Motlop get enough of the ball down there, they're going to certainly cause us a bit of grief.
It's certainly now that, say, Dawson and McFarlane are going to do their job comfortably on Kirsten and Hawkins. It's guys like Spur and Sutcliffe and Duffield that have got the harder jobs to watch the Geelong Smalls because it's always those guys that cut us up and you know it's going to happen. It's going to be inevitable that Motlop and Christensen and those players are going to sort of break free with a bit of speed and you just don't want Johnson to be left on some of these guys. It's going to have to be the small defenders' day to really stop Geelong from scoring.
In a way, it's kind of reminiscent of the Port game earlier this year when you had Chad Wingard and Angus Monfries running around and causing a lot of trouble too. And Robbie Gray to an extent. So I think you're right. The back six, the Smalls are really going to be in for a tough day.
And we did that Port Adelaide game without, I think, both Dawson and McFarlane. We had Silvani and Johnson down there. So it's showing you can do it without those key posts, but it's the small guys that will cut you up, and they do it with speed.
Yeah, I think the other important thing probably that last week we looked quite slow across the ground and lacked that bit of run, and Hill just didn't look quite proppy last week and just didn't look himself and Daniel Pearce probably still hasn't hasn't
got his kicking boots back on.
Yeah, he certainly hasn't been like the player he was in the first 5 or 6 rounds of the year, so it's definitely going to be important that we do be able to, if we don't have the ball, at least be able to move the ball better through the corridor. And the other probably main thing will be obviously Harry Taylor, who's been having a pretty solid month for Geelong and certainly being able to intercept and get back to the form he showed probably in the last 2 or 3 years and why teams are after him pretty much, and certainly Fremantle were at the end of last year. Who's the other matchups, guys, that you think will be interesting on the night? Who do you think will go to Fife? Do you think it'll be? Do you think Guthrie will go to him, or do you think they'll use someone else in that role?
Or Mitch Duncan, maybe?
Yeah, it'll be interesting because he certainly plays a little bit more of a forward role. The other interesting thing will be last time Fremantle played Geelong, they used Jimmy Bartel up forward on Michael Johnson, and they tried to make him accountable by going through Bartel all the time. It was just that Bartel couldn't kick that night, so it'll be interesting to see if they go with that same tactic this week as well. All right. Any other bits you want to bring up? Obviously, it's a pretty heated rivalry for Fremantle, and the Fremantle-Geelong games, and probably the last 5 or 6 have always been close and hard fought with a little bit of niggle involved with it. And obviously, after all the talk last year with Fremantle going down to Skilled Stadium and then Fremantle getting away with the victory, they'll certainly be looking to rebound from that and atone for last year's loss.
A lot of boys have to be on there. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say a lot of boys have to really be on their best behavior too, because with the carryover points with Zach Dawson and David Mundy and Hayden Ballantyne, they're going to have to really be careful, especially obviously Hayden, of course, not to get sucked in.
Well, one thing I'm looking at probably straight away is the Johnson Crowley matchup that it's going to incite a lot of retaliation, and it won't just be those two. It will bring other players into it. And I'm just thinking, is Crowley going to get guys like Subban and some other guys running in to fly the flag and actually give these guys a bit of a break? And I know that Crowley's going to cop a lot of attention. It's something that Carlton did to him that wasn't just Murphy getting around. Everyone sort of ran in, and while he was getting a bit of heat, everyone sort of jabbed in and threw their own words and a couple of little niggles and into him. It'll be interesting to see if our guys stick up for Crowley, if those two are going at it, or just let the two off to the side and run their course at battle during the night.
Oh, they'll protect Stevie J. Absolutely, they will.
Well, at least it's not Lee Fisher this week for some. So,
well, we haven't mentioned the umpires yet. Who have we got this week?
Stevic, Armstrong, and Pennell. So they're pro.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, so it should be a little bit. It's a pretty solid group there. So hopefully, as I said, the best team will win on the night, and there won't be any need to talk about anything other than the footy. So.
One stat. Did you guys see the stat on Super Footy that was tweeted earlier? In the last 10 matchups of the two teams, when Michael Barlow has played, Freo are 5-0. When Michael Barlow has not played, we're 0-10.
Yeah, I was going to save that for our tipping, but yeah, you beat me to it. That's a really cool stat. They brought it up last year at the beginning of the final too, when they're saying that Barlow hasn't lost to Geelong.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we may as well keep riding it for what it's worth, and hopefully it'll go to 6-0 this week. So obviously it'll probably be pretty close to a sellout, you would think, down there, certainly on a Saturday night and that sort of thing. And are you obviously heading down there, I would imagine, Seppo, with the crew?
Yeah, well, it's a couple of guys are actually going there and staying the night just because it's so far for some people to travel, and I'll be doing the drive down there, and it looks like it's going to be 16 degrees, nice cold, and a possible late shower at night. So it'll be interesting to see if it is dewy and how that will actually affect the game. And it's quite interesting. I'm not feeling as confident as I was, going into the final last year, but it's just sort of comforting knowing that we're not going in as weak as we did last year when we played them during the home and away season, that our side's a bit stronger. We still have a core midfield, and I think it's going to be a great atmosphere if we can actually shut out the crowd and get some scoreboard pressure on and drown that home crowd of theirs out, because it certainly helped in that final last year. And I think I've heard even from some people that have flown over from WA trying to get tickets to this game, it's potentially sold out already, at least for general reserve seat or general admin access to this game. So if you're looking for a ticket, it might be a bit late now.
Yeah. Who do you think will play on Valentine? Having a look at their back line, they've obviously got Enright, Lonergan, Rivers, Mackie, Taylor, who are all quite tall, and you wouldn't call them exactly speedsters. And then you've got Guthrie, who you think may play on Fife, or he may get the job on Valentine. But who do you think, obviously, for them will be the matchup down there?
Well, that's a good question too, especially because the last matchup in over at Subi, I mean, Valentine took Jared Rivers to school, and Rivers looked really, really slow and immobile against Hayden. So it's going to be interesting to see who they match up.
Yeah, I do remember a bit of footage where I think Valentine took Rivers left and right and sold some candy twice, and I think BT went nuts.
BT went nuts, yeah.
It's a great call by BT.
Hopefully that matchup happens again and Valentine does take him to town. It'd be great to get that, because they don't really have that true small. And I know Guthrie's listed down the back there, but I'm sure he'll get a job on one of our other more damaging midfielders or half forwards.
Well, they got to cover. If you're going to have Duffy, Crozier, Valentine all down there, I mean, it's sort of Enright. Really, you don't really want him playing on one of those short, small, quicker guys. It sort of leaves Guthrie, Mackie, and Rivers to take those guys.
Hopefully the ball is quite dewy and wet, because if we can get it in there and skid off their tools, we can actually mop up the crumbs. It's going to be a perfect way to exploit the tall Geelong defence.
Mind you, they could be saying the same against us with Christensen and Motlop, so it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Could be a night of small forwards for either side. Could be a nice shootout.
And interesting you say that, Seppo, about the ground conditions, because I'm looking at the weather.com forecast has 0% chance of rain, but a little bit of wind, about 11 miles an hour winds. So maybe the wind might be a factor down there.
Yeah, it can't be worse than some of the games they've played down there. The other important thing, and when we're talking about the stats from before, I think Middlemass brings it up every week. If we kick 12 goals, we're 22 or 27 and zip. If we don't kick 12 goals, we end up losing. So it'll be interesting to see which is the, obviously that 12 goals for us is that magic mark. So it'll be interesting to see, particularly if Pav doesn't play. I mean, I'm expecting he does, but if he doesn't, whether we can get enough goals from our other forwards, particularly with two new guys coming in Crozier and Duffy, whether we can get enough points to kick a winning score.
Yeah, hopefully having just Pav out in the whole park for once makes the difference of 2 or 3 extra goals, because we certainly lacked it last week, and hopefully if he can stay out there, can chime in with a couple and get us over that 12 goal mark.
And it's going to keep Lonigan and Taylor honest. They're going to have to, one of them stay on, and the other one's going to have to go to the Clark or Sandilands matchup when it goes forward too.
Yeah. All right.
That's an interesting point, too, because you wonder how much Zach Clark will be a factor, because if Pav doesn't play, I'd be very concerned with Taberner coming in, just given his inexperience and given the experience of the tall defenders on Geelong.
Yeah. All right. Guys, any other last points we want to bring up before we wrap it up for the night?
No, the only other thing will be I'll be taking a bit of notice into the Port Sydney game that will be happening at roughly the same time. And I'd love it if Port can do a favour and either knock off Sydney, or I suppose if Sydney do beat off Port, and we do lose, it sort of just keeps our top 4 hopes alive. But if Port somehow beat Sydney and we beat Geelong, it's going to be great to know that the race for that top 2 finish in a home final is still probably on the cards based on our last 3 games. So hopefully another fixture or result goes our way this weekend.
The other interesting point, I suppose, would be the fact that if Fremantle does win this weekend, Sydney do beat Port, it's probably going to be more than likely the first time that the top 4 has stayed the top 4 for 2 seasons in a row, because it hasn't happened before, and yet at this stage it looks likely that the same 4 teams will be in the top 4, even with the more difficult draws for both teams, or for all 4 sides.
I think it was on the couch on Monday. They're saying that the top 4 is in the exact same positions after this round as it was at the same point last year, like in order as well.
Yeah. All right,
it's satisfying to know that we made the grand final from this position. Let's hope we can replicate it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Gil, seeing you've got the furthest distance away from us, you can start off with the tips. What do you reckon the result will be?
I'm going to go against all the anxiety that we're feeling in Frioville and Purple Nation. I'm going to say we're going to come away with a win in this one. I think we've gone to Simmons. We've won there before. We won handily the first time that we met. I think we're talking about a bunch of guys that really does not fear Geelong, does not fear playing in Simmons Stadium. I think it's a real ballsy move by Coach Lyon putting Max Duffy in for his debut. And I look for us to come through in this one. I really do.
Okay, and how about you, Valkorum? What do you think the result will be?
I'm going with the Michael Barlow factor. It's going to be 6-0, but it's going to be a close game. I think we similar in aspect to Carlton that we'll just get over the line. So I think it's 3 or 4 points.
And Seppo?
I don't share the optimism of these 2 guys. I actually think we're going to go down by a couple of points. I really do think that Geelong is the informed team at the moment, and we're still struggling to get things going. But I don't think we're going to get done by a huge margin. It'll be a couple of points. I think it may go our way, but I really don't see us getting beat by more than 10 or 12 points. So I'm ticking Geelong in a painful 1-point win.
Yeah, I think one of the key things when you play Geelong, and teams have shown it, if you're willing to take a few risks and you can get quick ball movement through the middle of the ground, you can expose them. And a couple of teams that did it, and we did it pretty well when we played them here last time. And, even Richmond, when I went and watched them play them at the MCG, they were able to do the same thing. So if Fremantle are able to do that and bring back their trademark intensity for this game, I think they can get up. But it'll only be, as you said, a very close game by 1 point. If they showed anything that we've seen the last 3 weeks, then I think it could be a 6-goal loss. So it really comes down to what we see on the night. But I just got a feeling that they will certainly be doing their best to keep their top 2 hopes alive. Seppo, what about those guys who are travelling down for the game? Are you at the pub before the game or anything like that?
Probably not a safe area to venture out to pubs if you're not familiar with the Geelong area. If we do win, I might brave the locals and head to a pub. I can't remember what the name of it is, but walking distance from the ground just to the south. So I will venture out there afterwards if we do win. But if we don't, I'll be disappearing as quick as anything.
Fair enough. All right, thanks for joining us again this week, Seppo, and hopefully you get a bit more reward for your efforts than you got in the last away game versus the Saints.
Yeah, no worries. And if you do manage to watch early during the broadcast, probably on Fox, they'll show the banner. We've got a special little feature on the front of the banner that players will run through. So hopefully you guys catch that, and you'll have to watch to find out more.
Okay, absolutely. And thanks again for joining us, Gil, all the way from over in LA and getting up that early in the morning. It's a real honour to have you on board.
You got it. It's always a pleasure, and this is the most exciting time of the year. And let's just hope that that these guys dig deeper than ever before in trying to get back to the grand final.
Yeah. And once again, Valkorum, thanks again for joining us, mate. It's a pleasure
Not
to
a
have you on
problem.
board.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and just before we go, guys, this week, I think it's pretty touching, or be against our thing not to at least mention the tribute last week that Fremantle had to the young Maslin family who unfortunately perished in the MH17 disaster. And sometimes it puts a bit of footy perspective when you see the parents out there. And I think it was a sort of fitting tribute to them. And let's hope that those 3 young kids inspire the boys onto the rest of the season. And our condolences and all of the big footy family go to the Maslin family, and hopefully they'll be able to move on from that tragedy down the track. All right, that's it for this week, guys, and let's hope Fremantle are able to come out and show some of the form that we've seen in the previous last year, and obviously in the previous games we played Geelong, and let's hope that we can celebrate a famous victory again on Saturday night. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.